People talk about betrayal like it's a sudden stab in the back. But let me tell you the truth. Sometimes betrayal is slow, like a knife pressed against your skin, waiting for the moment you're too tired to fight back. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and this is not a story I ever thought I'd have to tell. But life has a way of dragging secrets into the light, and mine begins with a trash bag. Sophia didn't even look me in the eye when she shoved it into my hands. Black, plastic, overstuffed, crinkling as if to echo the humiliation in my chest. "Leave," she said flatly, as if I were a tenant behind on rent instead of her husband's mother. Michael leaned against the doorway behind her, arms folded across his chest. His silence was louder than any words. My boy, my only child, stood there and let his wife exile me from the very home I helped them build. He didn't raise a hand to stop her, didn't defend me, didn't even blink. That silence cut deeper than Sophia's voice ever could. I stood there in the marble foyer, chandeliers gleaming above me, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything around me screamed of wealth, ambition, and success, things I had sacrificed for, things I thought we'd share as a family. And yet, in that moment, I felt like a maid being dismissed after overstaying her welcome. I swallowed hard, the air sharp in my throat. The doorman averted his eyes when I walked past him, trash bag digging into my shoulder. To him, I was nobody. To Michael, I was a burden. And to Sophia, I was disposable. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Each floor we passed was another memory I couldn't take with me. Family dinners where I laughed too loudly for Sophia's taste. Nights I waited up for Michael, soup on the stove. Moments I thought mattered, discarded like old receipts. When the glass doors slid open, the cold hit me like judgment. Chicago wind doesn't play. It cuts through you, strips you bare. I clutched that bag tighter, as if it held more than just clothes and knickknacks, as if it carried the last pieces of myself. The cab driver barely looked at me when I gave him the address. The ride back to the suburbs blurred past, neon lights bleeding into darkness. I thought about how many times I'd driven this same road, rushing to Michael's basketball games, grocery runs, church on Sunday mornings. Now, I was heading toward a garage, my new home. The bungalow was gone, sold years ago to help fund Michael's penthouse dream. Strangers lived there now. The garage stood behind it, detached, forgotten, its paint peeling like old scabs. That was all they left me, a key to a storage unit, a scrap of space where even rats hesitated. The lock clicked open with a sound that made my stomach turn. I stepped inside, dragging the trash bag across the cement. The air was thick with mildew and motor oil. Dust clung to my skin as if even the walls rejected me. There was no bed, only a folding cot shoved in the corner. I laid the bag down, sat on the cot, and let the cold bite at my bones. My quilt, Charles's quilt, was the only thing between me and the chill that seemed to seep straight into my soul. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused. They'd been stolen along with my dignity. All I had left was silence. That night, I curled beneath the quilt, listening to the hum of traffic from the street beyond, the laughter of tenants who didn't know I was just steps away. My body shook, but I told myself I'd survive. I always had. What I didn't know, lying there on that cold concrete, was that the garage wasn't just my punishment. It was the beginning of something else entirely. People think money changes people. That's a lie. Money doesn't change you. It unmasks you. Long before a trash bag marked the end of my place in my son's life, I had already paid the price for his dreams. Every dollar, every sacrifice, every piece of myself, I gave it freely, believing it would bind us together. Instead, it only made it easier for them to cut me loose. I wasn't born into skyscrapers and penthouses. My life started small in a little two-bedroom house on the south side of Chicago. My parents raised us on discipline, prayer, and second-hand shoes. I married Charles when I was barely 20, not because I wanted a fairy tale, but because he was steady. He worked the factory floor like his hands were made of iron. I held down shifts at the library, shelving books until my back ached, while Michael tugged at my skirts, asking for stories I barely had the energy to tell. Charles wasn't a man of many words, but his silence had weight. When he died of a heart attack 10 years ago, I thought that silence would swallow me whole. But I had Michael, my only child, my reason to keep moving forward. When Michael came to me about the penthouse, I didn't hesitate. I sold the bungalow Charles, and I had built our lives in the place where Michael took his first steps, the kitchen where Charles kissed me with grease still on his hands. Every corner of that house carried us, and I let it go because Michael promised it was for the family. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading, "you'll have your own suite. You won't want for anything. This is our future." I signed the papers without flinching. I trusted him. At first, I believed we were happy. Sophia played her role, smiling, pouring wine, telling me she admired my strength. But little things gave her away. The way she flinched whenever I called Michael baby. The way she corrected me when I spoke about our family history, as if she wanted to rewrite the story. Her compliments always had edges. "That's a nice dress, Eleanor. You should let me take you shopping, get you something more modern." I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe she just wanted things neat, polished, presentable. But when you're raised in a world where you iron hand-me-downs to look fresh for Sunday service, you learn how to read between lines. And I could see it. She didn't want me there. Michael brushed it off. "Sophia just wants everything perfect, Mom. Don't take it personal." But how could I not? Each glance, each sigh, each moment at the dinner table, when my stories fell into silence, it was 1,000 tiny cuts before the blade finally pressed deep. The hardest part was realizing I had trained myself to ignore it, to make excuses. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We convince ourselves our children see us the way we see them. We pretend the bond is unbreakable, even when it's already fraying. Now, lying in the cold garage, I replayed it all in my head. The bungalow gone, Charles gone, my place at the table gone, and Michael, my boy, standing there, watching me leave without lifting a finger. I stared up at the cracked ceiling, the shadows shifting in the moonlight. Memories pressed in around me, ghosts of the walls I once called home. And for the first time, I whispered it out loud, so soft the night almost stole it away. I gave them everything. The first nights in that garage stripped me of everything but breath. The concrete was harder than I remembered, the kind that seeped cold into your marrow and reminded you that comfort was a luxury, not a right. I laid on a cot that sagged in the middle, wrapped in an old quilt that smelled faintly of Charles's aftershave, the scent fading just like his presence. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the penthouse lights across the city skyline, twinkling like a taunt. My son slept warm while I shivered just miles away. Grief has a sound. It's the rattling of your own breath in a hollow room. I would lie awake, listening to the pipes groan and the occasional scuttle of mice in the walls. There were no family photos here, no laughter, no trace of the life I had built. Just oil stains, dust, and the echoes of a woman nobody seemed to need anymore. What cut deepest wasn't the garage itself, it was its proximity. The bungalow I had sold, the one that paid for Michael's penthouse, still stood just across the lot. New tenants lived there now, their children's bikes leaning against the porch where Michael once learned to ride. I would hear their laughter in the evenings, the clinking of dinner plates through open windows, and it felt like a cruel reminder. I had traded everything, and in return, I had been erased. Sometimes neighbors strolled by, carrying groceries or walking their dogs, and not one of them looked my way. To them, I was invisible, an old woman tucked into a forgotten garage. I caught myself holding my breath when footsteps approached, afraid of being recognized, more afraid of being pitied. Pride is a strange thing. It kept me from asking for help, even as the cold gnawed at my bones. I tried to busy myself with small routines, sweeping the concrete floor, folding and refolding my clothes, humming hymns my mother used to sing. But no matter how much I tried, the silence always returned, heavier than before. Nights blurred into days, each one lonelier than the last. It was during one of those restless mornings, my fingers stiff from the chill, that I brushed against something hidden in the corner, a rusted metal cabinet, shoved back against the wall, its paint peeling like old skin. I had almost forgotten it existed. My hand lingered on the cold steel, and a shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I didn't know it yet, but that cabinet was more than a piece of junk. It was the first crack in the silence, the beginning of something that would change everything. The morning I pried open that cabinet, my hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the crowbar twice just to keep it steady. The hinges groaned like they hadn't been touched in decades, the smell of rust and old paper rushing out as though the past itself had been locked away. Inside were layers of dust, yellowed folders, and a safe I had never seen before. My chest tightened. Charles's safe. The dial was familiar, even after all these years. He always used the same code for everything, the date we were married. I pressed my ear close, listening for the faint clicks, my breath fogging the steel. When it opened, it was as if a piece of him stepped back into the room with me. Inside, tucked between faded photographs of Michael as a boy, were documents that felt heavier than stone. Stock certificates, IBM, Apple, Microsoft. Companies I barely understood when Charles was alive. Names I had only heard when Michael raved about them years later, chasing his own dreams of tech. Savings bonds, matured long past what I imagined. And at the bottom, folded neatly as if he knew I would one day need it, a deed to a cabin in Wisconsin. But it was the letter that froze me. His handwriting, shaky, but still his. Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The boy's got ambition, but watch him. He takes after my side, always chasing the next big thing. These are for you, not him. Sell them if you need to. Live free. A bank statement was clipped to it, the balance staring back at me like an accusation. Enough to start over. Enough to buy back pieces of the life I thought I had lost. I sank to the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. Betrayal and relief collided so violently it made me dizzy. Charles had trusted me to hold this, to protect what was ours. And Michael, Michael had been the one to move this cabinet years ago when we cleared out the garage. He had called it junk. He knew. He had touched the very thing that could have saved me and dismissed it. My teeth clenched until my jaw ached. All the cold nights, the silence, the humiliation of that trash bag. They didn't have to happen. My son had known, and he had chosen to let me rot in a garage. I folded the letter slowly, pressing it to my chest, as though Charles could still feel me there. For the first time in weeks, I felt heat in my body, not from a quilt, but from anger threading through my veins. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the cot, staring at the papers scattered around me, my mind racing through the years, the sacrifices, the lies. When the first crack of daylight slipped under the garage door, I had already decided. I was going to make a phone call. Just one. And from there, nothing would ever be the same. The woman at the financial office looked younger than Michael, her blazer sharp, her smile practiced. She tapped her pen against the stack of papers I laid out on her desk, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was holding. "Mrs. Hayes," she said carefully, "do you know what you have here?" I wanted to laugh. All I saw were numbers and logos, pieces of paper Charles had tucked away like keepsakes. "I know my husband worked himself half to death for those," I said. "Beyond that, I couldn't tell you a thing." She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and began explaining, patient, professional, the way someone might explain fire to a child who had only ever known darkness. The IBM and Apple shares, bought for pennies back in the 80s, had grown like weeds over decades of compounding. The savings bonds, long matured, were worth more than 10 times their face value. Even the Wisconsin cabin, while modest, had appreciated in value with the surge of lakeside retreats. She leaned back, her tone gentle but steady. "Mrs. Hayes, after taxes, after everything, you're sitting on assets north of $1 million. Probably closer to 2. The words landed heavy. $1 million. Me, who had been sleeping on a cot in a garage, scrounging for coins to buy instant coffee. I stared at my hands, the same hands that had scrubbed library shelves, the same hands that had packed lunches in brown paper bags, the same hands that had trembled as I sold my bungalow to fund Michael's life. A bitter taste rose in my mouth. If I had known, if I had been wiser, asked more questions, paid more attention to the cabinet instead of shoving my grief into boxes, would I have saved myself from this humiliation? Would I still be living in the bungalow Charles and I built, instead of shivering in a garage like a ghost? Guilt dug into me sharper than pride. Maybe Michael's silence that day in the hallway hadn't just been Sophia's doing. Maybe I had made it too easy to cast me aside, blinded by trust, by love that was never returned in full. The advisor's voice softened. "You don't have to decide everything today, but you need to understand this changes things. You're not just stable, Mrs. Hayes. You're wealthy." Wealthy. The word didn't fit in my mouth. It sounded like a costume tailored for someone else. And yet, as I gathered the papers into a neat stack, sliding Charles's letter back into its envelope, I felt something stir beneath the guilt. Something steady, deliberate. I was no longer the woman clutching a trash bag in a lobby while the doorman looked away. I was no longer the mother left to rot in the shadow of her own sacrifices. I was a millionaire, quietly, secretly, and the world, especially Michael and Sophia's world, had no idea. The condo was modest compared to the penthouse, but when I turned the key in the door for the first time, It felt like a cathedral. The walls were bare, the rooms smaller than what I'd left behind, but every inch of it was mine. No one could tell me to leave. No one could hand me a trash bag and push me toward the door. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. Freedom had a smell, fresh paint, new carpet, and the faint trace of possibility. I bought clothes that fit me as I was, not as Sophia would have wanted me to be. A soft wool coat, sturdy leather shoes, and a dress that reminded me of the ones I used to iron for Sunday service. Nothing flashy, just dignity sewn into fabric. For the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman, not a burden. Days found their rhythm. I woke early, made coffee without fear of judgment, and took long walks through the neighborhood. On Wednesdays, I started volunteering at a senior center a few blocks away. I read to women who reminded me of my mother, played cards with men who carried war stories in their eyes, and served meals to those who had nothing but gratitude. It filled me in a way money couldn't touch. But every evening, when I returned home, I would sit by the window with my tea and let my mind drift back to Michael and Sophia. I read the business sections of the Tribune, clipping articles about Michael's startup. I passed their buildings sometimes, blending into the city crowd, looking up at the glowing penthouse windows. I didn't linger long, just enough to remind myself of where I had been erased. It wasn't obsession, not yet. It was clarity. Each step forward I took, each dollar spent with purpose, each smile I gave at the senior center was another reminder that I had survived, that I was building something separate, something deliberate. But underneath that new rhythm, something sharper began to hum. I thought of Charles's letter, his warning about Michael's ambition. I thought of Sophia's cold eyes, the way she had pressed that trash bag into my hands as if she were discarding a stranger. They thought I was gone. They thought they had erased me. One evening, I closed the newspaper, folded it neatly, and set it aside. My reflection in the window stared back at me, older, wiser, unbroken. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered, steady and sure. I wasn't erased. I was rewritten. Trouble has a way of slipping through polished doors. No matter how high the penthouse rose above the streets, cracks will always show if you know where to look. I didn't have to pry too hard. Chicago has a way of talking. An old neighbor from the bungalow, Mrs. Carter, still worked part-time at a boutique where Sophia shopped. She told me in passing, shaking her head, how Sophia never left without maxing cards, flaunting handbags that cost more than a month's rent. Another whisper reached me at the senior center from a volunteer's son who worked in finance. Michael's startup, the one that had once made him the golden boy of the neighborhood, was bleeding cash faster than investors could patch it. I didn't dig openly. I just listened, nodded, tucked the pieces away. I clipped more articles from the Tribune, this time noticing the shift in tone, cautious headlines, words like overextended and pressure mounting. The same reporters who once praised him now sounded like vultures circling. And then there was the guilt. I saw it plain one afternoon, standing across the street from their building, invisible in a sea of commuters. Michael came out alone, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow. He stopped at the curb, phone pressed to his ear, and for a moment his face carried something raw, something heavy. The same boy who once clung to my hand at church picnics, hiding behind me when he felt small. But I wasn't the one he turned to anymore. That boy had left me behind in a lobby with a trash bag. Now all I could do was watch. The marriage, from what I heard, was beginning to fray. Sophia spent as if the world were hers, while Michael drowned under the weight of his company. And yet, in public, they still smiled. They still posed for glossy photos at charity galas, flashing perfect teeth, for cameras that never saw the tension underneath. I gathered these details quietly, never rushing, never letting the anger boil over. Each piece fit into a picture I had already started painting, a reminder that their lives weren't untouchable, that even in their glass tower, they were vulnerable, fragile, breakable. That night, back in my condo, I spread the clippings and notes across the table, a map of fault lines waiting for the right pressure. My lips curled into a smile I didn't recognize in myself. It wasn't joy, it was knowing. The cracks were already there. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to widen them. Revenge doesn't always begin with fire. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. I learned quickly that money gave me two things I hadn't had in years: freedom and invisibility. Sophia and Michael had cast me out like an afterthought, assuming I'd fade into nothing. What they didn't realize was that people notice absence just as much as presence. And when someone they thought was broken suddenly begins to glow again, it rattles the ground beneath their feet. I started small. A new haircut, shorter, sharper, more modern. Clothes tailored just enough to flatter, but not flaunt. I didn't parade myself around the loop or hang off the arm of anyone new. No, I moved through places where Michael's circle occasionally drifted. The church bazaars, charity luncheons, even the little Saturday farmers market, where Sophia liked to be seen buying organic. I didn't chase conversations. I let them come to me. "Eleanor, you look wonderful," people would say, their voices tinged with surprise. "Retirement must be treating you well." I smiled softly, offered a gentle, "God has been good to me." That was enough. Rumors don't need details. They thrive on suggestion. Soon, word made its way back to the penthouse. I could feel it in the way Sophia's eyes darted when we crossed paths at the market one breezy morning. She wore her usual curated perfection. Silk scarf, manicured nails, but her smile wavered. She had expected me to look beaten, ragged, cast off. Instead, I looked alive. "Eleanor," she said, her voice just a touch too high, "out shopping." I held up a basket of apples. "Just keeping busy. You know how it is." Her lips pressed into a line, and for once, she had no clever jab to offer. That silence was worth more than gold. But it wasn't only about appearances. I began rebuilding connections. At church one Sunday, I ran into Ruth Daniels, an old friend I hadn't seen since Charles's funeral. Her hug was warm, her eyes still carrying that steady kindness that years couldn't dim. "Child, you look like you found your feet again," she whispered after the service. "I think I finally have," I admitted. Ruth became my confidant, not because I spilled everything to her, but because she reminded me who I used to be before grief and betrayal hollowed me out. She prayed with me, laughed with me, and reminded me that strength doesn't always shout. It endures quietly until the right moment to rise. And as whispers spread through the community, Eleanor Hayes was thriving. Eleanor Hayes was renewed. I could almost hear Sophia grinding her teeth in that glass tower of hers. She had thought she erased me, but erasure only works if no one remembers your name. And now, people were saying it more than ever. The silent war had begun, and I was winning without lifting a finger. But whispers alone weren't enough. They were only the opening notes of a symphony I intended to finish. I lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling of my condo, heart steady, mind sharp. It was time to stop being a rumor. It was time to strike. Power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from the quiet shuffle of papers across a mahogany desk. Michael's company, his pride, his lifeline, was still young enough to be fragile. I didn't need to ruin it. I just needed to remind him whose blood ran through its veins. With Jerome's guidance, I discovered that through a series of careless moves and overleveraged expansions, Michael had left a door wide open. Shares of his company, small but significant, were up for grabs. Most investors wouldn't notice them, hidden in the shuffle of private sales. But I noticed, and I had the means. I sat across from my financial advisor in a sleek downtown office, the city humming below. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "Buy them. All of them." Within weeks, the transaction was done. My name, quiet, unassuming Eleanor Hayes, was on the ledger. No fireworks, no headlines, just the subtle shift of ownership, enough that I'd never be pushed out of the conversation again. I didn't need a seat at the table. I was the table now. The shock came fast. Michael's lawyer reached out to him with the news. And though I wasn't in the room, I could picture it clearly. Michael's face blanching, Sophia's shrill disbelief. The mother they had written off as a burden was now an investor with power. The irony was almost too rich. Without realizing it, Michael was now partially working for me. That evening, I walked to the Loop, the streets glittering with city light. I stood on the sidewalk outside their glass fortress of a penthouse, the kind of building that towered over ordinary lives. From where I stood, I could see the faint glow of their living room. I imagined the tension inside, Michael pacing, Sophia's voice cutting sharp through the air. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the autumn wind biting at my cheeks. For a long moment, I simply stood there, the hum of traffic and the distant horns wrapping around me like a score to a film only I could hear. They thought they'd buried me in a garage, but the truth was staring back at them in the lights above. I whispered it to the night, to the city, to myself, words that tasted like victory on my tongue. You see me now. Families don't shatter all at once. They splinter, thin cracks that widen with every word unsaid, every truth avoided. And Michael's home was splintering fast. The whispers had reached them. The shares I bought, the presence I carried in public, it all pressed against their polished facade. Michael tried to steady the image, but Sophia's pride was a blade that cut deeper with every passing day. "She's humiliating us," Sophia snapped one evening, her voice echoing through the penthouse walls. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. The words found their way back through neighbors, staff, and the little ears in their circle that never missed a thing. "Your mother walks around like she's some queen, and the city eats it up. Do you understand how this makes me look?" Michael, weighed down by business pressures and his own guilt, could only murmur what I had waited years to hear. "She's my mother, Sophia." That single admission was enough to ignite her fury. The glass tower that once gleamed like a dream was now a battlefield. Their marriage strained under the weight of resentment. But cracks don't just expose, they invite weakness. And in his weakness, Michael reached for me. One night, as I folded laundry in the quiet of my condo, the phone rang. His voice on the other end was softer than I remembered, stripped of its usual confidence. "Mom," he said, pausing as if the word itself hurt. Can we talk? I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel it, the emptiness of every moment he let me walk out that door with nothing but a trash bag. I know things went too far. He stumbled on. Sophia, she pushed, but I should have stopped it. Maybe we can fix this. Maybe if you just. And that was when I cut him off. Stop, I said coldly. You stood there. You watched. You let her throw me out like garbage. There's no fixing that. His breath hitched, a mixture of desperation and shame. I'm still your son. For the first time, I felt no ache at those words. No motherly instinct to soothe. Just clarity. The balance had shifted. He needed me now, not for love, not for comfort, but for survival. I lifted the receiver from my ear and let his pleas dissolve into static. With a steady hand, I placed it back onto the cradle. The line went dead, and with it, the last illusion of power he thought he held over me. For the first time in years, I was the one who hung up. The thing about reputation is that it's built like glass, clear, polished, fragile. One crack, and people stop admiring it. They start looking for the fault lines. Everywhere I went now, eyes followed. At church, people whispered, Eleanor Hayes looks better than ever. At charity events, women who once pitied me now asked where I shopped, who I dined with. In business circles, Michael's colleagues shook my hand with respect, noting how wise it was of me to diversify into younger companies. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't need to. All that mattered was perception. Eleanor Hayes was no longer the discarded mother in a garage. She was a woman reborn. Michael and Sophia, meanwhile, couldn't keep the cracks hidden. At one luncheon, Sophia arrived alone, her diamond necklace glinting but her smile brittle. Someone asked where Michael was, and she brushed it off with a too-sharp laugh. Oh, busy chasing investors, as usual. The air tightened, the way it does when everyone knows there's more to the story, but no one says it aloud. I didn't have to do much. I just had to exist in their orbit, looking composed, radiant, untouchable. Their silence did the rest. Every sideways glance, every awkward pause. They fueled the whispers until Michael and Sophia's image began to tarnish on its own. But underneath the social veneer, something darker was brewing. Through careful ears, I learned Sophia's frustrations had shifted into strategy. She was tired of Michael's guilt, tired of his hesitation whenever my name came up. She began plotting her own survival, using charm and manipulation to wedge herself deeper into his company's affairs. What Michael thought was partnership was really Sophia positioning herself for the day he fell. And he was falling fast. Stress ate at him, guilt gnawed at him, and Sophia's sharpened edges cut him daily. The family he had chosen over me was splintering from the inside, and I was the quiet mirror reflecting their ruin back at them. Still, whispers and rumors weren't enough. If I wanted the world to see the truth, that their betrayal was not just cruel, but calculated, I would need to reveal what I had kept close. I returned home from an evening gala, the city's lights glittering below my condo balcony. I set my wine glass down, opened Charles's old letter once more, and read the lines where he warned me about Michael's ambition. My fingers traced the ink, my chest steady. There was one devastating secret Michael and Sophia had kept buried, one that could shatter everything they built. And I had the means to expose it. The time for whispers was over. The time for truth was coming. Some truths are too heavy to keep in shadows. They demand light. I chose my battleground carefully, not in a boardroom where Michael could hide behind contracts, and not in the privacy of family where he'd twist the story to suit himself. I chose the church, the same sanctuary where I had once baptized my son, the place where we had buried Charles, a place where the community still believed in truth, no matter how inconvenient. It was the annual stewardship meeting, a gathering where elders, business leaders, and families came together to celebrate generosity and speak of legacy. I had asked for a few minutes to share a testimony, and no one questioned it. After all, I was the widow who had weathered storms, the mother they all remembered helping her boy rise. They didn't know the storm was still raging. I stood at the podium, hands steady on the wood, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Michael and Sophia. They sat near the front, dressed to impress, but their smiles faltered the moment I began. I was told once that sacrifice was the price of love. I began softly, and I paid that price. I gave up my home, my savings, my years so my son and his wife could have theirs. I thought I was building family. Instead, I was being erased. A hush fell over the room. I reached into my bag and laid Charles's letter on the podium, along with the stack of documents Jerome had walked me through months before: stock certificates, matured bonds, deeds. But my husband was a wiser man than I ever gave him credit for. He knew ambition could twist love into something unrecognizable. He left me a safeguard, a fortune hidden, waiting for the day I might need to stand on my own. Gasps rippled through the pews. Eyes shifted to Michael, whose face had gone pale. Sophia's hand tightened on his arm, but even she couldn't mask the cracks spreading across her perfect smile. I continued, my voice firm but calm. I am not the woman they cast out. I am not the mother begging at their door. I am Eleanor Hayes, and I stand here with my dignity restored, my respect intact, and my reputation no longer tethered to anyone's approval but God's. Whispers grew into murmurs. Leaders nodded. Old friends wiped tears. And all the while, Michael shrank deeper into himself, the weight of every choice pressing down until he looked like a man collapsing under his own shadow. For years, I had carried humiliation like a stone in my chest. That day, I laid it down in front of everyone, not out of spite, but out of truth. Truth that stripped Michael bare. Truth that shattered Sophia's carefully crafted image. As the meeting closed, I stepped down from the podium, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Michael couldn't even meet my eyes. His shoulders hunched, his lips pressed tight, his skin clammy. The son who once watched me walk out with nothing now sat paralyzed, drowning in the weight of what he had done. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt lighter. Greed eats its own. I didn't need to raise my hand anymore. The rot in their marriage was doing all the work. After the reckoning at church, Michael and Sophia's world spiraled faster than even I imagined. The whispers grew into stories, the stories into judgments. Michael's investors grew uneasy, questioning his judgment, his stability, his control. Behind closed doors, Sophia sharpened her survival instincts. She had never been the kind of woman to sink with a ship, not when she could step off onto a lifeboat of her own making. It started quietly, a transfer here, an account there. Sophia moved money out of Michael's reach, shielding it under her maiden name, whispering to lawyers in sleek offices downtown. She told herself it was protection, but I knew better. It was preparation. She had no intention of going down beside him. When the final blow came, it was merciless. One morning, Michael woke to find accounts frozen, debts called in, and his wife gone, her closet stripped bare, her jewelry box emptied. She hadn't just left him emotionally. She left him bankrupt, broken, and humiliated. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had cast me out with a trash bag. She had left him with nothing at all. I didn't interfere. I didn't have to. But I did make sure of one thing. Sophia would never circle back to me. Every asset Charles left me, every bond, every deed, I locked it down airtight. Jerome and I worked late into the night, crafting protections so tight, not even the sharpest lawyer could pry them open. Sophia could claw at Michael all she wanted, but she would never touch what was mine. News of their split spread quickly. Sophia Hayes files for divorce. The headlines read, though anyone with eyes knew she was already halfway out the door before the ink dried. She painted herself as the victim of a reckless husband, playing the part of the wounded wife to perfection. But those who had seen her glitter and sneer knew better. And Michael, what was left of him, didn't fight. He couldn't. He had no strength left to defend himself, let alone the woman who had gutted him. I watched it all unfold from a distance, my condo warm and quiet, the city glittering beneath me. I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I simply watched, the way you watch a storm pass, knowing it will leave wreckage in its wake. For years, Sophia had smirked across dinner tables, corrected my words, and erased my presence. Now, she was the one erased, her perfect image shattered. For years, Michael had stood by her side, complicit in my exile. Now he stood alone, stripped of the very life he sacrificed me for. Their undoing had come not from my hand, but from their own greed, their own betrayals. I had only lit the first match. They burned the house down themselves. As the news anchor's voice trailed off into silence, I closed the television, poured myself a glass of wine, and let the satisfaction settle deep into my bones. The queen had returned, and her enemies had crowned her without even knowing it. The garage feels like a dream now, a shadow that doesn't touch me anymore. Yet when I close my eyes, I can still smell the oil stains on the concrete, feel the chill of that first night pressed against the unforgiving floor. That was where they thought I'd end, discarded, forgotten, erased. But instead, that was where I began. The cold concrete became the crucible that forged me, that was the ground where I burned and the ground where I rose. When I look back, I don't measure myself against their penthouse anymore. That tower of glass and stone with its polished floors and chandeliers was never a home. It was a cage, one gilded enough to fool even me for a time. They thought power lived in high walls and mirrored elevators, but I've learned power doesn't glitter. It doesn't sip champagne or dine from crystal. Power is silent. Power is patience. Power is the fire that waits in the ashes until someone dares to step on it barefoot. And I did. My freedom came not from wealth, not from status, but from humiliation. From the moment Sophia pressed that trash bag into my hands and Michael stood by in silence, that memory burned me down to the bone. And from that ruin, I rebuilt myself into steel. I stand taller now, not because of the money hidden in Charles's cabinet, not because of the whispers that trail me through church pews and charity halls, but because no one, not my son, not his wife, not their whole kingdom of glass, can ever throw me out of my own life again. But sometimes the past still knocks. Michael calls. not often, but enough that I know he hasn't disappeared entirely into his ruin. His voice is smaller now, stripped of its arrogance, trembling with the weight of everything he's lost. The first time, I almost didn't answer. My hand hovered over the phone, my breath caught in my chest, because part of me still expected him to sound like the man who once said, "Mama," with reverence, with devotion. He didn't. Now, when he speaks, I hear the fracture in him. He pleads in roundabout ways. He doesn't ask for money outright, but the desperation bleeds through every pause, every sigh. Sometimes he talks of Sophia, his words a mixture of anger and disbelief at how quickly she turned on him. Other times, he drifts into silence, as if waiting for me to fill it with comfort, as I once did. But I don't. I listen, because silence is sharper than any weapon I could wield. I listen, and I remember the night he chose her over me. I remember the trash bag, the humiliation, the ache in my chest as I walked out of that penthouse stripped of everything but my dignity. I remember his eyes, how he wouldn't meet mine, how he let her speak for him. That memory seals the door every time I think of opening it. Forgiveness is a luxury for the untouched. I am not untouched. I am carved by betrayal, reshaped by fire. And though I no longer hate him, I will never open my arms again. Some wounds close only when you stop trying to heal them. My wound has become my armor. As for Sophia, her name doesn't even linger on my tongue anymore. She was a chapter, a storm that tore through and then collapsed under her own weight. She was a hollow crown, glittering but empty, a queen of smoke and mirrors whose downfall required no hand of mine. She betrayed Michael before I ever needed to lift a finger. I don't need to chase her ghost. The world has already erased her. And yet, I wonder if she thinks of me, if she remembers the night she believed she had won, pressing that trash bag into my hands like she was throwing out the last of the trash. I wonder if she ever understood that was the moment she lit her own pyre. But perhaps it doesn't matter. Some people spend their lives building kingdoms only to set fire to them with their own greed. What remains is me, stronger, colder, free. I've learned survival isn't about clinging to the people who betray you. It isn't about begging for a seat at their table or scraps from their feast. Survival is about knowing when to let go, when to burn the bridge behind you, and walk forward without ever looking back. And when you do, when you walk into that new world with nothing but your scars, you discover something extraordinary. Scars don't fade. They shine. They remind you where the blade struck, and they remind others where not to strike again. I live differently now. My mornings are quiet. I make coffee strong and black, the way Charles used to drink it. I walk to the park sometimes, and no one whispers behind their hands anymore. They nod. They greet me with respect. At the senior center, I hold hands with women who think their lives are over, who whisper their fears into my ear like confessions. And I tell them the truth. I tell them that survival isn't pretty, but it is powerful. Sometimes when I stand at the window of my new condo and look across the city, I see the tower of glass that once cast me out. Its lights flicker, its walls still gleam, but it feels small to me now. Distant. It's just a building. What they don't understand, what they'll never understand, is that it wasn't the penthouse that made me. It was the garage. And if you're listening, if your scars mirror mine, if you've been betrayed, discarded, exiled from the life you thought was yours, then hear me. Revenge doesn't heal the wound. It never will, but it makes sure the blade never cuts you twice. That is my legacy, not the fortune Charles left me, not the whispers in the community, not even the son who lost himself in ambition. My legacy is fire, the fire they thought would consume me, but instead forged me, and I will carry it quietly until the day I leave this world. A flame that cannot be put out,